I want to take it back when you talked about the imagination as like a magma that solidifies into a form and then it has another eruption. What is the eruption that you speak of? What would be an event that kind of reshapes that? What are those?
Well, I think it's a crisis of those institutions that I talked about. And here I should mention that when we're talking about an institution, we're talking about in the anthropological sense of the term. So an institution is like a building, like, I'm trying to think of an American example. It could be, like the Federal Reserve Bank is an institution. It has it has people who work for it. It has buildings, etc. But an institution in the anthropological sense can also be the institution of marriage, or the institution of the police, or the institution of prisons. These sort of broad structures. So these structures, these institutions, are these solidifications of the imagination. The prison, for instance, is this solidification of the idea that this is what should happen to people who somehow acted in a criminal way and infringed upon society. Of course, we know that the vast majority of people in prisons right now are not there because they've done any grievous crime, but are in fact there for political reasons or economic reasons. There's we can look at books like The New Jim Crow in the United States, the work of Angela Davis, the work of Ruth Gilmore, and see that prisons don't exist to punish people for wrongdoing. They exist to create and sustain political apparatus. So when we look at that as an institution, as we look at the prison as a solidification of our sociological imagination, our imagination of society, what's good, what's bad, we can see that eventually these institutions reach a crisis. They reach a breaking point. People stop believing in their legitimacy. People stop believing their mythology that surrounds them. And in those moments, you get a kind of social eruption. You get a moment where society no longer believes that its institutions are functioning, that they're fulfilling their role, that they work, and that they serve the values they claim to serve. And in those moments, you get a rare opportunity for social institutions to sort of collapse or to melt and to be reformed. Sometimes those reforms are good, and sometimes those reforms are very bad. And I think in the United States and really around the world, we're in one of those moments of eruption. I mean, nobody in their right mind thinks that the social institutions that we have are working. Nobody can look at what's happening and imagine that the institutions of policing are functioning. No one can look at the statistics and think that the institutions of prisons are working. And certainly no one can imagine that the capitalist economy, with all of its many crises, is functioning. It's certainly not functioning for the 99%, so to speak. So we have a moment where there's a break in the way that we imagine social institutions, the way we imagine society, and a chance for people's imaginations to become somewhat more free. But the problem is, when those breaks happen, it's not just the forces of the angels that are at work. There's also the dark forces as well, and you have people like, for instance, in the United States, Donald Trump, or I'm in Germany right now, there's a party called Alternative for Deutschland, there's a social movement called Pegida, which are virulently racist, virulently anti-immigrant, who are also jumping in to say, yeah, the social institutions don't work, but the solution is get tough on this population. The solution is more racism. The solution is more inequality. So when there's a crisis of the imagination, when the social institutions are brittle, or when they begin to melt in some sense, it's a dangerous time, a time of great opportunity, but a time of great challenge as well.
I really like the way you framed that, because you said it's not necessarily good or bad. It can go either direction, and really what's going to be the difference maker is who can basically grab the collective consciousness and steer it in their direction, so to speak. And part of why I do this show, I already spoke to you before, is to try to get people to sort of like have a different understanding, or to examine things critically that we don't normally examine. And I think that was very, very important. What you talked about there was basically that we're in a moment right now where things are starting to get a little bit fluid, and we can kind of try to change that understanding based on the situation that we're in.